Just another moment, folks, and we'll join you. We'll start the webinar in just another moment, please.
Good morning. Welcome to Voice and Data's multi-part series 6, Demystifying the Carrier Buzz. I'm Frank Kania with Voice and Data Networks. Wanted to kick this morning's session off. We'll start briefly with a overview, and then we'll pass the presentation along to Jim, who will be leading us in today's session, Transforming Business Communication. Just to touch on Voice and Data Networks, at Voice and Data, we understand the entire life cycle of the myriad of communication systems you rely on every day. To that end, we focus on bringing you superior functionality and value every step of the way. We take a customer-centric view in our approach to making communication applications return profitability and efficiency to you, the customer. We offer end-to-end solutions for organizations of all sizes. Our customer base ranges from Fortune 500 companies to small private firms. We take certifications seriously. Our team of experts is fully certified by manufacturers like Avaya, Microsoft, Cisco, and HP. We are a privately held company. VDN began in 1995 with just one employee. Today, with over 60 employees nationwide, VDN has both the headquarters office and warehouse located in Edina, Minnesota, with regional offices throughout the United States. With that, I am going to let you know that our next session will be Tuesday, September the 27th at 10 a.m., entitled SIP, The Future of Intelligent Communication. With that, I'm going to pass it along to Jim to begin today's session. Jim?
Thank you very much, Frank. I appreciate that. Thank you very much for the introduction. And thank you guys, thank you everyone for being here again in this part 4 of this series. And I'm going to run through very quickly the next step in the series associated with demystifying the buzz around SIP, or Session Initiation Protocol. So with that, let's go ahead and start the review. So if you can go to the next slide real quick, to the review slide, slide number 5. And let me know when you get there, Patty. Okay. So let's look specifically at where we are at, what we've come through so far. What have we learned? We've talked about businesses' ability to take control of, of their growing multi-vendor network, right? So you've got a multi-vendor communications network. We've added voice to data. That's great. Got that done. Now we've got multiple vendors that need to communicate, and we've got different types of devices trying to communicate. Our computers, our cell phones. You name it. There's a number of different devices that we're using to communicate with. So it's not just multiple vendors, but it's also multiple devices with multiple vendors. So it's becoming even more interesting, the environment that we find ourselves in today. Now, in addition to that, we've got the ability to start adding unified communication. And when we look at unified communications, SIP being the key element to that, presence will help businesses add that intelligence to the information delivery mechanism. So today, what we're going to talk about is the next step in this whole process. We talked about user communications, the benefits of presence, and we started off with an understanding of what SIP is. Now let's look at it from a carrier perspective. So if you can move to the next slide, please. So predominantly, businesses have been concerned specifically with a lot of the cost associated with traditional communication, right? So, but one of the major concerns that businesses have in regards to SIP communications has to do with the cost of moving from traditional circuits, that T1, analog, digital, over to SIP, and some of the costs associated with that. So let's address some of these concerns up front here. First of all, when you look at SIP, one of the concerns is that SIP trunks do seem to cost more than traditional trunks. that in actuality is somewhat true right now, but there's a lot of different factors associated with that. In reality, a lot of carriers have upped the price of installing SIP trunks because they're trying to protect some of the revenue of their traditional circuits. So they're making it, not as easy for customers to move to SIP because they don't want to lose some of that traditional revenue. So that's one element there. One of the interesting things when you look at SIP and you look at the total cost associated with like-for-like bandwidth. So let's forget about the analog versus digital or IP versus digital and analog. You just look at bandwidth, pure bandwidth. The interesting thing about SIP is that in the traditional world you have to buy things in bundles of 23 plus 24 lines, if you will, bundles of 23 trunk lines plus a data circuit. So you have to buy this in bulk, right? With SIP, you pay per megabyte, per amount of bandwidth utilized. So the interesting thing is that you're only buying specifically what you use, and when you need more, the nice thing about SIP is that it's an expansive technology and it can grow. So that 1 megabit becomes 10 megabits very quickly, very easily. So this whole, I got to buy 23 circuits and not use 10 of them, that environment goes away. And then in addition, some SIP carriers are offering an extended LADA. So where you may have been paying for long distance costs, when you go to SIP circuits, because of the association with IP and the IP network, SIP trunks are costing less because the extended LADA doesn't include long distance costs. So when you're looking at this, the total cost of this, you've got less hardware from a SIP perspective, so you're not making a gateway change between traditional and IP. You've got IP at your office, SIP, which is an IP-based protocol, and then SIP carrier trunks. There's no transitional elements in there like gateway. So that requires less hardware, so you save some more money there. So yes, when you look at it first glance, definitely needed some additional cost up front, but it has an immediate return on investment. And companies are seeing like 2 to 4 weeks return on that investment. It's pretty significant. So if you'll move to the next slide, please. So on slide 7, we're going to talk about another one of the concerns that business has regarding SIP, and that it requires very specialized and very expensive hardware. Now, really the only element that SIP does require in order to work is a session border controller. And the reason for that is that SIP communicates at a much higher level than traditional routing and security appliances support. So what that means is that you've got, if you've got the OSI model, if you've got the traditional OSI built-in systems interconnect, if you've got that model, most networking, routing, and security appliances stop at layer 4. Well, SIP actually communicates above layer 4, up into layer 7, up into the application layer. So what you need is really something a lot more intelligent than a router to assure that you've got security, you've got some invisibility to the outside world, right? So that's really the effect here is that you do have to terminate a SIP trunk on a special piece of equipment called a session border controller that actually translates SIP communications across the internet. And what it also does is provide application layer security. So it's not like you're not getting something for nothing here, because once you go to a session border controller, you're going to have far greater control of the applications that are coming in and out of the network. And that's always, always better. The next major concern, so let's go to slide number 8, please. So the next major concern is, just waiting for it to pop up here. The next major concern is that SIP isn't available everywhere. The reality is that SIP is pretty much in every marketplace, every major marketplace, and in the United States, and it's becoming more of an offering, more of the immediate offering of businesses from each of the major carriers. So AT&T and the like, and Verizon and the like, they're all providing SIP now, where they used to be protective of their traditional trunking. They're actually now releasing that, and they're actually bringing SIP to the table with the first discussion. So you're going to find the primary and secondary markets are very well covered. Maybe tertiary markets, maybe not so much, but tertiary markets are an infrastructure problem more than a carrier problem. And by infrastructure, I mean the infrastructure is outdated. It's older copper, not fiber enabled, that type of thing. But if you go to the SIP Center, which is sipcenter.com, it is a website that holds the most complete listing of service providers in each of the areas in the United States. So it's kind of an interesting website to sort of keep as a value stream on your network to make sure that you keep up with, where are the providers and what are their offers. The SIP Center is that. So when you look at these three concerns, trunking's here. If we look at the cost of the hardware and specialized hardware, yes, you're going to have to put in a session border controller, but you're going to get a higher level security, application layer security into your network, which you don't have today. And then when you talk about the cost of SIP trunking versus traditional trunking, you're going to get a much better return on investment with that. So why don't we go ahead and move to the first polling question. Patty, if you could, let me know when we're done with the poll because I can't see it.
I will do that, Jim.
And again, this polling question is about, the primary business concerns for SIP. Okay, I'm not hearing you, Patty, so I'm just going to go ahead and just give the answer here. I'm sort of flying a little blind here today, guys, so my apologies up front. But go ahead.
It appears about 80% of the people said all of the above.
Okay, perfect, because that is the correct answer. Look, I mean, when we look at it from a business perspective, a non-technical perspective, when we're looking at deploying new technologies, obviously the initial cost is the key concern. And it's, an overriding issue when you're looking at new technology. How much is it going to cost me to purchase the technology? But when you look at total cost, total savings, and you look at that technology in terms of those two, I think you get a much better picture of the value that the technology can bring. So yes, all of the above is the correct answer. And Patty, let's go ahead and move to slide number 10. So if we look at business support, if we're looking at making SIP work within today's communications, right, there's a few things we've got to do, right? First, we still have to be able to backhaul into some legacy technologies, right? So we've got to be able to resolve global telephone numbering schemes. And if you're not familiar with the global telephone numbering schemes, there's a whole IEEE specification for that. But we've got to be able to dial from SIP out to the outside world. But we've also got to be able from the outside world to dial back into SIP. So those are the two. That's a big element with telephone numbering schemes. The next thing we've got to do is manage analog. Right now, the translation of analog numbers to SIP is completely supported. But we've still got some issues with fax and fax signaling across SIP trunks. So we're probably still going to need some of those analog numbers to stay in place while we're making this transition. Everything's got to communicate, obviously, through H.323, which is the IP-based protocol for transmission. And it's got to be resilient in the event that carrier signaling is lost or delayed. So we've got to do that. Finally, we've got to be secure, right? We've got to secure everything. We've got to authenticate. So those are two big elements. So go ahead and move us to the next slide, please. So when we're looking at the communication back and forth between SIP and the PSTN, what SIP provides is a couple of things. One of the elements is called a PINT, or PINTs, which is a PSTN to internetworking protocol. And basically what a PINT is it's basically a client, a SIP client embedded inside your network, behind the firewall, behind the session border controller, and it launches requests to create phone calls on the public telephone network. So On this drawing here, you show the SIP telephone on the left with the arrows pointing to the right. The pint is located within that session border controller, and it makes the translation from SIP addressing over to traditional telephone addressing. So a pint is necessary in order to make that call from your environment out to the outside world. And I know I'm getting a little deep here, but I wanted to make sure that you guys were aware of the technology associated with getting what we need to get accomplished done. Right? And again, this allows that web access to voice contact and to click to dial and to get over to fax services. So move me to the next slide, please. The next piece are spirits. SIP-less spirits is an interesting solution because it provides that technology, that service technology from traditional telephony back into the session border controller into the SIP network. So this is, I'm launching a call from a traditional network, and I need to get that call to go inside a SIP-enabled network. And you're not always going to be able to know that you're calling a SIP URL. So spirits, you guys still there? Patty?
We hear you fine, Jim.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry about that. So, so a spirit is actually the web.
Excuse me, Jim, you're a little faint.
All right, let's try that again. Any better?
Great.
Okay. So the spirit is that SIP-enabled web client that is translating incoming telephone lines to SIP. So again, you're not going to know that you're calling a SIP URL. You're going to be calling a telephone number that then gets translated into SIP, and a spirit is necessary to accomplish that. So let's go to slide 13, please. So now that we can, with SIPs, with pints and spirits, we can kind of move back and forth between the traditional world and the SIP world. The last thing we need to do is understand the mapping of these SIP telephone numbers, and that's called electronic number mapping, or ENUM, and it's the process of getting these names back and forth. I mentioned the IEEE specification. That's the E.164. That number is the IEEE specification for telephone numerics across an IP network or a DNS network. So if you look at that, that'll be the basis of taking your telephone number and in turn associating it with a DNS, because that's what has to happen basically. So if you look at all of these telephones that reside in the network with a well-established dialing scheme, the ENUM specification actually solves the problem of having to tell people how to redial. So instead of telling people how to redial, we're basically just going to be making that translation for them in the network. And again, what an ENUM does is it takes our address of record and all of our user identifiers. And if you remember that from our last month's call, hopefully, the address of record is our main number. That's who we are. The URIs are all the devices that connect to that address of record. So an ENUM takes your address of record and your URI and transfers that into the telephone numerics. So the good news is that customers don't have to do this on their own. Internal, external, it doesn't really matter. Right? So if I'm internal, dialing out to the PSTN, Pint takes care of it. If I'm internal or external to the network, dialing into a SIP network, spirits take care of that. And the whole process of translating those numbers is the job of ENUM. And again, these are just basic elements that we need to understand when we're talking to carriers, because when you're talking to the carrier about the services that they're offering, you need to have a good working knowledge of this. So let's go to the second poll question, Patty. And that is, which SIP elements support the ability to dial a SIP URI? So let's take a look at that question now. And let me know, Patty, when we get to like the poll question being completed.
I will.
So hopefully I think we're done with the secondary polling question. Again, the whole idea here is which elements support the ability to dial, and it's pretty much all of the above. It's basically each one of these elements. Both spirits, pints, and the enum platform provide us with the ability to dial a SIP URI. So it's kind of an interesting it's an interesting environment. Understanding these three components will help when you're negotiating your contracts with carriers with SIP. So Patty, why don't you move us to slide 15, please? And in this slide, what we're talking about is just a really quick refresher on the URI, which is the Universal Resource Identifier. This is basically the numbers that your devices have and basically tells the SIP presence server what you're doing and where you're at. So the address of record is my name at mycompany.com. That's my SIP address. Presence determines whether or not I'm on, or whether or not my user is on the phone, which is user equal phone, or whether or not I'm user equal cellular. And then it redirects the enum program to tell the incoming call where to dial. So this is an interesting element, because when you have external customers who don't know where you're at, they never know that they've been redirected inside of SIP. They just get to you. So instead of getting to a busy signal or getting put into someone's voicemail, the nice thing about the ability for taking the address of record and changing it into a URI and making that translation from traditional telephones to SIP-based telephones provides additional efficiency in your company. And that's really the value add there, is that additional efficiency. All right, so let's move quickly to slide number 16. So we're here talking, advantages of SIP trunks versus analog circuits. Now, this information constantly changes, but of recent, what we're finding is that SIP trunks are significantly cheaper than analog services while maintaining the same quality of service. So what we're finding here is that SIP trunks usually are costing approximately $20 to $30 per trunk versus the $40 per an equal analog circuit. And again, when you look at long distance and LATA extension, SIP trunks are going to cost you even less than traditional analog and TDM rates. So there's a significant price differential between analog and SIP. Moving to the next slide, please, slide 17. With SIP and PRI, what we're talking about are taking the advantages of SIP trunking. SIP trunks in the PRI environment are, again, cost $20 to $30 per trunk for unlimited inbound and local calling. And again, the long distance rates can be well under 2 cents a call, right? So you've got an immediate primary benefit over PRIs than you do from traditional trunking to SIP. And if you couple that with what they call oversubscription, which is purchasing more trunks to support the ability to make more or less calls, that's when SIP becomes even better, because you're going to buy the less amount of trunks, SIP trunks, than you would of your PRI trunks. So if I bought, two sets of 23, so there'd be 46 trunks there, I may be able to support the same amount with only 8 to 10 trunks. So there's a really, SIP trunks. So this is a really great savings when you're looking at, this is not a one-for-one, right? So SIP trunks can expand and contract based on bandwidth need, and PRIs can't. So you're going to buy less of them, and they're going to be more competitively priced. So from a business perspective, that just makes a whole lot of sense. Next slide, slide number 18, please. And again, what we're really talking about here is bandwidth. We're talking about the ability for the bandwidth to be compressed or expanded based on need. And again, what we're really here is that we only want to pay for what we're using. Again, bandwidth is going into this whole new area now. Bandwidth cost. Bandwidth isn't unlimited. Bandwidth is very limited, and it has a specific cost. But being able to dynamically allocate bandwidth between voice, between data, between video, this is where SIP is going to be even greater advantage to you as a business, because right now you're paying statically for video, statically for voice, statically for data. And if you've got oversubscription in any one of those, you're going to be paying for it, because you're not going to be able to pull that bandwidth and throw it onto another circuit. SIP allows you to do that. That's the value proposition associated with SIP when it comes to these traditional trunking methods. So let's move to slide number 19 real quick and go to polling question number 3. So, you know, when we look at total cost savings, SIP is better than traditional services, and I'm just going to give this one up front. You know, the SIP trunking is going to, so the answer here is true, and I'm not going to keep you guys in suspense here. The value proposition of SIP is that from a business perspective, it's going to require less hardware because there's going to be less transition between old and new. The transitions are going to be done inside of the session border controller. That's pretty much the new technology that you're going to have. After that, you're going to be spending less money in long distance. Although the installation of those SIP trunks may be an initial cost that you have to overcome, that cost is going to be immediately, that's going to go into an immediate ROI because of long distance, because of the cost per trunk, right? So I'd say the biggest thing that customers need to understand when you're going toward carrier-based SIP solution is stop thinking in terms of trunks. And that's the hardest thing to do because we've always talked trunks. That's where we came from. So if we can start looking at this from a bandwidth perspective, how much bandwidth am I using for voice? 1 meg, 2 meg, 10 meg. How much bandwidth am I using for data? How much bandwidth am I using for video? That's where we have to start moving the discussion because it is a bandwidth world. We are moving to a cloud-based environment where applications are sitting outside of the device that we're using. We're just using the device through an internet browser to gain access to these devices, to those applications. Definitely is important for us to consider that we got to stop thinking in the old terms, in the old primary rate terms or in the old analog terms. So just keep that in the back of your heads as you guys are talking and moving forward with the SIP and the value proposition. And if you want to go ahead and move me to the last slide there, Patty. I know we had some hiccups and we had a late start. I'm trying to end up here on time to be conscientious of everyone's time. But there's a lot of great information here when it comes to SIP and the business value associated with it. I would recommend that you talk with your voice and data reps and get them engaged in the conversations that you're having with carriers. You're probably having carriers contact you directly regarding SIP, but this would be a great person or people to have on your behalf when you're having that discussion. Knowing the technology and knowing the value proposition is one thing, but having that experience on that back end can help you negotiate the best rates possible for these new trunks. And again, think in terms of bandwidth. Don't think in terms of trunks. And with that, I will say thank you again very much. This is, again, Jim Sevier, and thanking you very much for taking this time to talk to me more about the demystifying carrier buzz surrounding SIP. So with that, I will say again thank you and hand this back to you, Patty.
Thanks, Jim. Frank Caney here. Thanks to everyone for participating. Just to recap, there will be an email that will be forthcoming with a survey and questions and follow-up from today's session, and also an opportunity to register for the upcoming session, Part 5 in the series, SIP and the Future of Intelligent Communication, scheduled for Tuesday, the 27th of September at 10 a.m. In this session, we're going to discuss the principles needed to support an enterprise migration to SIP. No two enterprises are alike, so it would be difficult to come up with a single works-for-all recipe for migrating to SIP. However, we will look at common areas where SIP can assist businesses with vendor interoperability. With that, I want to thank you for your time. Have a safe and enjoyable Labor Day weekend, and we will see you again on the 27th of September.
Thanks for joining us. Look forward to an email tomorrow with an overview of the session and a registration link for 5 next month.